Dr. Ed Williams here. This is our through aesthetic water cooler, and we owe a lot of thanks to Equal Marketing, first of all, for for hosting this effort and allowing us to teach other young physicians. It's something I'm passionate about. I love teaching the business aspect because I don't think that we have a lot of advocates and people that teach our young folks and older folks how to do this. So a couple of announcements, a couple of things I want to share with you. First of all, if you have any questions, shoot us over, an email. It's hard to take a lot of questions during this because there's a lot of things we want to go through. Today is about developing multiple profit centers. We're going to talk about what are they, pitfalls, how you do it. And one other announcement. One of the things that I feel is very important, you see, is physicians, we're really not trained in business. And, when I talk to my colleagues, when they talk about changes and struggles that they're having, their answer to that is to just work harder. And that's not really not the answer. And so we also, as professionals, have a little bit of a different way if we decide to go out on our own and be entrepreneurs and run our business. And here's the challenge. If you run, I got a buddy of mine who runs a big company, family business. They do about $150 million and boats, RVs, all kinds of things. I mean, and yet his full-time job is working on the business. We as professionals, as technicians, are revenue generating units, right? So we tend to try to, quote, work on the business after hours. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's healthy for your family. I don't think it's healthy for your business. So how do we do this and how do we partition it? What I do is I try to make sure that I am putting time aside for working on the business. The reason I'm telling you this is the podcast that we're doing today. I specifically have these at 4 p.m. in the afternoon on the Eastern time because I don't want to be taking away from my family doing this kind of work in the evenings. I think it's important for us to focus on our family. And so what we need to do is to start getting in the habit, if we're going to go down the road of becoming better business people, better entrepreneurs, of taking time to work on the business during business hours, and not just putting it off to the side. If it's not a priority, it's not going to be a priority for you. Again, as I say, one of my one-liners is, your priorities are not what you say, they're what you do. So making time to work during. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we want people to show up to this podcast live, and because we think you're going to get a lot more value out of it live. And it also, if it's something you enjoy, we definitely want you to share it to friends of yours. If you think it's something that's useful to other physicians who are trying to find their way as business people, as entrepreneurs. So we want you to share it. And what we're going to do is our next aesthetic water cooler is on March 21st. It's the ABCs of starting a practice. Now, I'm not an attorney or an accountant, but I've learned an awful lot through the School of Hard Knocks over the years. I'm happy to share that. And that will be at 4 in the afternoon. But on April 25th, because we're going to promote and announce this, there's going to be a drawing, basically, and you have to be on from the beginning of the podcast to the end of the podcast to win this. That episode will be how do you avoid burnout in the life-work balance of a healthy physician, because that's really, really important, right? We like to talk about the clinical things, but our life-work balance is very, very important because that ties back into happiness. On that April 25th, when we do this, we're going to, people who have been from the beginning to the end of the call, okay, so the first 5 minutes to the end, and are going to get basically 45 minutes of some coaching from me, one-on-one, and we'll set up a prearranged time that it works, that I can maybe help them out. So that's going to be drawn based on the people that are there. April 25th, when I talked to Equal Marketing and Lila's last night, she said, well, maybe we should do it next month. And I said, you know what? I'm going to give physicians the benefit of the doubt because they don't like to take away from clinical time during the day. But I'll give you a couple of months, guys and women, so to do this. It's really important to start taking time to work on your business and not look at it as an afterthought. So having said that, and going through this. What we're going to talk about today are profit centers. What is a profit center? Well, think of it this way. Again, so many of these things go against the way we're trained. Okay, we learn in medical school and we learn in residency to really become very efficient operators. And as we get into practice, those of us who do well financially learn to become extremely efficient. In other words, we learn to maximize our performance, right? Here's the problem. There's only so much of you, okay? In business, they call it scaling up. How do you scale up something? Well, in our business, if you will, the only way you can do that is to leverage yourself. So you can maximize your performance all you want, but there's only so many rhinoplasties and only so many facelifts you can do in one day, and then you're exhausted. So how do you leverage yourself? Well, there's a couple ways, okay? One is, one is to have some growth within your business, which is just organic, right? Continue to work on making your schedule extremely efficient, but that's kind of comes back to performance a little bit. The other is through profit centers, and that is a way to have something working for you while you're traveling, while you're asleep, while you're whatever. I mean, so if you say, okay, I'm going to take a dual-pronged approach to this, I'm going to really work on becoming extremely efficient. And gosh, I could talk about that for an hour, because there is no better way to put something to your bottom line than to increase your efficiency and reduce your expenses. But so again, adding profit centers, and we're going to talk about what that is. And I've done all of those, and I've failed on plenty of them too. And then, or there's another way, is you can actually acquire or buy a business. And it's one other way to grow your business and leverage yourself. So, but today we're specifically going to talk about, profit centers. I'm going to talk about, at the end, I'm going to go specifically through a number of profit centers that I've had. So let me just throw out a few of them. What do we mean? What is a potential profit center? And I say potential because they can be profitless centers, and I've had a few of those. And the most important thing is, if you do have one of those, to have the intestinal fortitude to cut your losses and move on. And I will tell you that the bank respects that a lot more. Your team will respect you a lot more than hanging on and having a bloodletting. And I've seen so many, because I've helped and worked with a lot of docs where I've looked at their P&L and their balance sheet, and they have a piece of equipment, for example, that they're not making money on, or they're losing money on. They're making money over here, but then they're losing money over here. And many times they don't even know when they're losing money over here. So what are we talking about? Well, you could have skincare services, right? Okay, you could sell services and you could make some money on that. How about adding other practitioners? If you own the majority stock and you bring people on and your business is profitable, in other words, even after the doctor's compensation, there's something left over, there are dividends. Some people look at adding a fellow or having a fellowship program as a profit center. We've been through periods of time where our fellows have been profit centers. We've also been through, and for various reasons, times when we really have changed because we're really more focused on training and their education, and that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm more focused on that, and that's a whole complicated thing. I mean, we're doing trauma, and the fellows are doing well with it, and they're learning. But as that became less profitable, we changed gears a little bit. So you can have a medical spa, how about a laser, hair removal laser, cool sculpting. We're going to talk about those in detail. So each laser, I guess, could potentially be one more profit center. And we're going to talk, I have a whole podcast on how to add equipment and technology. How about real estate? There are times when, a doctor says to me, hey, I'm seriously thinking about, should I add real estate to my portfolio? Because, sorry, my hair was a mess, was in the OR. Skincare products. You can make money on products. Do you know that only about 4% of what the cost is what goes in the jar. There's a lot of marketing, there's packaging and all that. And I know because I had a skincare product company at one point. You could add a surgery center. You could add other ventures. There are many other ventures you can get into, cryotherapy or cryo. There's other things you can invest in. How about a research company, clinical trials? I mean, we know some of our colleagues that have done this and done it very, very well. You could put in another type of center, maybe a hair transplant center. We have been through different variations of that. We had one that I lost a lot of money on years ago. We've actually done very well with the one that we have currently. How about a destination practice, destination office? That could be a potential center. And, could be, some people really enjoy consulting and you could have a consulting business. For a number of years, I toyed with the idea, but I just, honestly, I love to teach and I love to share what I've learned, but I don't want to get on a plane and go visit a practice and write up a report. That could potentially be, another type of profit center. So, I think you really have to look at these things because I said, if you're not focused on them and taking them seriously, you can lose a lot of money. And so that's one of the things I want to share today is, questions you need to ask yourself, before you proceed. So overall lessons, a couple things, I'm the eternal optimist. So you'll never really fail at something. I remember when I first went to practice, people said, well, you're just going out on your own. You don't know anyone in where you're going. And I'm like, yep. I'm used to it. Listen, I got by on 30 grand last year. So anything above that is a positive. And well, what are you going to do for a call? I don't know. I'll figure it out. Here's the point. You're not going to fail. You're not going to die. You can only learn and grow from it. You don't want to be overly optimistic. I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs get themselves in trouble with that. You need to do your research, but a few other truisms. No risk, no reward. You can't expect someone else to take your risk and then you pick up the rewards. It doesn't work that way. When you commit, to something, you make it work, or you get rid of it. And so you grow up really fast when you start making these decisions on your own, versus being, and I don't want to use the word coddled, but maybe you're in a big group or you don't have those. But with those, there are some ties and frustrations that go along with them. And I know anyone who's on this call understands what I'm talking about because a lot of people, walk around and go to work and are frustrated every day. So there is no, right. I am an absolute, and I'm going to do one of these podcasts on leadership, the importance of it, because most people throw that term around, but do not understand how critical good leadership, and leadership solves so many of these problems. So before you move forward, I think you have to ask yourself the whys. Why do I want to do this? And we're going to talk about that a little bit. What are the potential whys? And answer some of these questions, to yourself. Well, why am I interested in proceeding forward? So is it because you want to diversify? As a solo practitioner surgeon, it's a little scary when you have a big staff and a big overhead and a facility and momentum and it's just you. God forbid something happened to you. So, diversification is one potential reason for wanting to do that. If something happened to me, not that I want that, but if something were to happen to me for my family, I'm taken care of because we are so diversified here in our business that it's not just me. Other reasons are you interested? Are you interested just to make, profit? I mean, let's face it. I talked about a lot about money on the last podcast, and it doesn't solve a lot of problems, but it's a fun game to play, providing your values are where they need to be, your heart is where it needs to be, and you're not doing things for the wrong reasons. But it's nice to win on profit. It's nice to, to win that game. As I say, money is just a way to keep score. Maybe it's just a challenge. To me, quite frankly, I love the challenge of the business game. To me, that's what turns me on and why I do this. There are intangible benefits. For example, maybe the exposure that you get out of something. We put our 21,000 square foot facility in over 20 years ago. I was 37 or 38, 22 years ago. Scared the daylights out of me. But, I didn't have a lot of gray hair at that point. But when I had a patient come from 2 hours away and they walked in our center, okay, the intangible benefit was like, okay, I'm in the right place. This guy's the deal, So there are intangible benefits. I mean, our surgery center, and we'll talk about that at some point, is not terribly profitable. Okay, there are times we actually, borderline make money, borderline lose money, but there's a huge intangible benefit, okay, for the efficiency of it. Today, I had morning appointments, got back to the office. I did a liposuction case, submental liposuction case in the office, a little office OR, went down to the main OR, and did a, deep plane facelift, eyes, fat grafting, whatever. And I'm back upstairs, all by 2:30. Can't do that in the hospital, and I knew I had some things this afternoon, but the efficiency that we have, that's another intangible benefit. So I think you want to say, list these things out when you start to look at, why do I want to have profit centers or other profit centers? And, those are things you got to ask yourself. I also like the fact if you can take revenue and you're shifting that and paying down debt in a building or whatever, you are turning your ordinary income into capital gains, which is favorably treated down the road. So there may be some other strategic reasons why, okay, that's your why you're doing this. So there's some questions, I think, really deep down personal questions you have to ask yourself when you're looking at this too. And if you read one book, read The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. Everyone I've ever given that book says it's extraordinary. Because is your primary practice in order? And I should say this like 5 times so that it really sinks in. Is your accounting absolutely accurate? And is the legal aspect of your business absolutely set up correctly? And have you become a student of leadership and put a lot of things in place in your primary practice? And I'll tell you why this is so important. Because I've coached, mentored, guided a lot of people who are ready to move on to the profit center and their own primary business with themselves and their estheticians and whatever. They may get a staff of 4 or 5 or 3 or whatever the number is. It's a hot mess. Okay. If you don't have good systems in place, policies in place, and culture in place so that you can leave, go out of town and not be getting phone calls all the time or having all kinds of staying late with staff issues, you don't have a good business. And so once you put these in place, you have a business. You don't just have a job. Otherwise, you have a practice that's just a job. And the problem with that is a job's not worth anything. So if you're trying to create something of value, you need to make sure no one's going to want to buy that either, by the way. You bring in a partner or associate. No one is going to want to buy a piece of equity in something that's a hot mess. You need to make sure that your accounting, your legal systems and policies, and your leadership's in place. Now, there are some people that just don't enjoy that sort of thing. And if that's the case, man, you should be just pumping out facelifts or rhinoplasty or whatever you enjoy doing. If you enjoy, I happen to enjoy the game of trying to grow a business, try to get bigger every year. I get a kick out of that. I'll be honest. It is a game to me. Can we get bigger and not take away from what I do enjoy doing, which is really doing surgery. So other questions you need to ask yourself: have you studied the business model well enough? I mean, let's face it. You don't want to go down the road and just break even. You bring in 100, you spend 100,000. I mean, what good is that? That just, so I have a rule of thumb. I mean, first of all, what is the average profitability on a successful business? It ranges. It ranges, folks. I would say the average, and this isn't something I made up. Those of you who know me I do a ton of reading. I read the Wall Street Journal every day, and if you want to get yourself an education, do that for 10 years. It's probably better than an MBA. But you want to see about a 10% at least profit in a business. I mean, think about it for a second. You got $1 million business, you've seen $100,000 of profit. Okay, you get a $3 million business, and all the mouths to feed. $300,000 profit, $3 million, $300,000 profit. By the time you pay state and federal taxes, you're down to $150. Okay, is it worth managing all that revenue and staff if you're going to make less than that? Honestly, net take home. And so I think you really want to look at if you have a business model, for example, whether it's a surgery center or whether it's a laser that's putting less than a 10% profit, you might want to consider getting rid of it. So I like to see somewhere in the 20 to 30 range. And the higher the barrier to entry into what you're doing, and those of you who don't know what a barrier to entry is, it's to get into that business. For example, to get into the business of being a surgeon is a lot more than to get into the business of having a laser hair removal. Okay, so the higher the barrier to entry, frequently you'll have a higher margin. And like I said, our surgery center, we struggle to, make a buck. We're lucky if we make 5%. Sometimes it's less. We've had years where it's been a break even, but there's an intangible benefit. So, it's important to look and say, what am I looking at? Profitability. How well have I studied this whole thing? So, a couple more questions before you go into the new venture, if you will. Is it something? And this is really important, something I didn't understand years ago. Is it something that I can systematize and scale up? While you're not necessarily, if every transaction is a change, different widget, you are going to lose efficiency. So scaling up in the business world, that's what they call it, scale up the business. It's being able to go ditto, 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 and make a 10% margin on it. So is this something that I can systematize, scale up? Because what you don't want to be doing, and I love this expression, you don't want to be trading your time for dollars. How much is this going to take of your time? If you are taking time away from surgery to do a hair removal laser, and you're in a state, for example, like New Jersey, where you have to be doing, you have to do the procedure yourself, I can tell you it doesn't make sense. You're better off going after the things that do not take your time. And that's not easy, because every profit center is going to take a degree of your time. What is your competition? Okay. So I'm going to tell you about one of my failures. I guess it really wasn't a failure. We had a skincare company. I started it in 1994 with glycolic acid. It was called Skin Scripts. And our pharmaceutical company was Northeast Cosmeceutical. It was right at the time when Physician's Choice was being launched. In fact, we used to have a booth right across a lot of the meetings with Margaret and Sakara. I raised a bunch of capital. We had investors. We got the thing going. I turned it over to a CEO, and she basically bankrupt the company. So what did I learn out of that, honestly? And I've told a number of my fellows, do not get into the skincare product. Don't start a skincare product company, because it's not worth, here's the big thing, okay? It's not worth the distraction. If I had taken that time and put it into my practice, not that my practice was struggling, but all of these efforts take time away from your practice. And so, it's important to ask yourself, how well have I studied the market? At the time, I had a misconception. I thought to myself, well, I can get a skincare product company. I can get glycolic acid and put it in the jar. Honest to goodness, we were putting it in the jar, really nice silkscreen jars, $2.50, $3. It was going out the door, $25, $27, $28. It was a nice margin on that. I'm thinking to myself, this is awesome. I'm going to teach the local dermatologist how to make a few bucks. And where's their loyalty going to be? I mean, well, I didn't understand the market because your local competition is jealous of you. They're not going to buy stuff from you. And second of all, how the heck can I compete with skincare companies? They're huge. I mean, and at the time it was MD Formulations, and now we've got, products that are backed by, Nestle, really, Galderma. We've got products that are backed by Alloderm. So, it was, I didn't lose money. What I felt really bad for is I raised venture capital money, and the investors that we had lost some money. I mean, I say I didn't lose money. I put up like $25,000 or something. So, what is the barrier to entry? Is this going to take away from your time? There also can be some what I call intangible, some unintended consequences. For example, say you decide you're going to put in a big spa. You might have the woman the spa across town that you've done a facelift on, you got a great relationship with, you think the likelihood of her wanting to support you and send you people when you're in direct competition. So it's really important to do a market analysis of anything you're going to do and really look at the market to determine, does this make good sense? Now, we had another failure. We have what's called a Rejuva Center, which is our medical spa. And I don't really like to call it a medical spa because we don't do pedicures, we don't do facials, we don't do it. It's injectables and basically things that are high barrier to entry, only that physicians can do. We had done very, very well with it for first 5 or 6 years. Nobody in the area, we started in 2003, nobody in our area had a day spa or a medi spa, if you want to call it. And again, I didn't like the word medi spa because it's not a spa. But it was separated from the practice. And even to this day, it's in the top 1% of metrics as far as profitability, gross revenue, all this. Well, we thought, let's just take this concept and move it up to Saratoga Springs. Saratoga is 25 miles an hour away. It's a hiring community. How can we fail? Well, we didn't understand the market, first of all. At the time, right now, you had 20-year-old, 25-year-old women who were coming in for Botox. Back then, 2005, 2000, it was still it's a very provincial town, and people were still very skeptical. We were 2 years into it. And we were losing money, which I was funding out of the main practice. And I was looking at our projections, and what I did is I took our projections and went out it took 2 more years before our expenses and profit, gross revenue crossed so that we were at a break even. We were 2 years into it. At that point, lost about $250,000. And I renegotiated the back end of my lease, cut my losses and pulled out and got rid of the equipment. I think it's the mistake I made is I didn't understand the market well enough. I should have done how many Botox injections are being done in Saratoga, right? I mean, so study the market before you do anything. Don't just go on a quote gut. I mean, that's why 90% of businesses fail, right? And 50% of them fail within the first year. Is not understanding business and being undercapitalized. So make sure it's really important that these kind of questions are answered. What is the market? So a couple other things that you need to understand is that as a surgeon, nothing beats a scalpel per unit time, period. That's it. That's the whole. So don't go taking away from your surgical practice to be doing things that per unit time, and don't kid yourself. And when I say that, it's critical that you do cost accounting for everything you do. And so what do I mean by cost accounting? Cost accounting takes into consideration not just the person. Let me give an example. I have, mentored over the years a lot of people, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, hey, you know, I'm doing great with cool sculpting. I paid X, and I paid it off over, I paid it off over the first year, whatever the number was, right? Or first year, 2 year, year and a half. And I'm saying, so they're like, man, I'm making all kinds of money with it. I'm like, well, cost accounting really takes into consideration the square footage, used space in the building, the heat, the lights, the electric, heat, light, electric, liability insurance, staffing, training, lost revenue, meaning, like, for example, say you've got a renewable piece of something, what do you call it? The renewables, there's a 10% loss there. So it's important to take everything. And, we did this with the whole thing I'll talk about on technology, but we did this with cool sculpting. And we looked at it over a 2-year period of time. And, we actually, it was a profitable piece of equipment, but nowhere near what one would think it is when you take into consideration the opportunity loss of the space. And so I would encourage, and this is what we do every time we launch a profit center, whether it's the hair transplant center that we just acquired 2 years ago or a new piece of technology, we do a separate P&L and balance sheet on that equipment, and we track it. Imagine if you had 20 profit centers and 6 of them were kind of losing money. If you really looked at them carefully on paper, that means you're carrying them. So it's really important to do cost accounting and on those type of things. But it's important also to remember that nothing really beats the scalpel. So there are some other questions that I think are really, really important when it comes to developing profit centers. And this is what I call a systematic approach. One is be very honest with yourself. Are you doing this just to make a few bucks? Or do you really like the business side of things? As I mentioned before, I love this stuff. I consider it a game. Are you a prudent risk taker? I've talked to a lot of docs that are great surgeons, plastic surgeons, facial plastic surgeons, and they just don't like taking financial risk. And I get that. And if you're not, maybe you shouldn't go down this road, or certainly don't bet the farm on it. Do you enjoy the business side of things? Do you enjoy meeting with accountants, consultants, lawyers when necessary? To me, I look at the business aspect of things. I get a kick out of it because it's nothing more than a study in human behavior. How people react, whether they work for you or whether they're purchasing something. The decision to make purchases is still more of a emotional thing than it is a rational thing. I find that fascinating. So, do you enjoy doing this? Because if you treat meeting with accountants, meeting with attorneys, and consultants as an afterthought, like beneath you, kind of something that the quote practice manager should be doing, you're much more likely to fail. There can only be one. You've got to set the pace and be the leader. Are you okay with managing staff? I read a lot of books, so I'm going to throw a few out there. Some of my best books, and again, I'm not a fiction guy. I like data because I'm a science guy, right? So in business, I want to see data. I want to learn from people who have been there and done it, and I have for the past 20 years. Good to Great, basically any of Jim Collins' books. There's Great by Choice, Good to Great, and Built to Last. I've read all 3 of them. I think I've read Good to Great a couple of times. Jack Welch's book on winning. He also wrote one called, Straight from the Gut or something. Larry Bossidy wrote a book called Execution, and it's basically about, do you have the guts to make the tough decisions, especially with your staff? And what that means is, if you want to create a culture of winning and accountability, you have got to be willing to look people in the eye and talk to them about where they're coming up short. So because any profit center you put in place is going to have moving parts, including people. And if you don't like this sort of thing, maybe you're better off being a performer. Doesn't mean you can't invest in the practice and be part of it, but somebody has to be the benevolent dictator, and you have to be willing to work on these things during business hours. You can't speak to attorneys in the evening typically, and you're not on your game when you're doing this late evenings. And that's one of the reasons, as I mentioned before, that we're going to keep these podcasts during the day. Because if you're serious about this, and you're serious about being a better business person, then you need to commit to it. Things to understand. Bigger is not always better, and staff costs will eat you alive if you're not a good leader or manager. Staff, I used to look at staff as, and they kind of, as a liability. Because if you look at the P&L under expense, that is typically your biggest expense. In fact, you talk to accountants, that's also where you can make the most money, by making your staff or looking at your staff as an asset. The problem we have as physician, entrepreneur, performers is that we're not used to that. We can let our ego get in the way a little bit and say, hey, I'm the one that's generating all the revenue. So, but if your staff is not led, managed correctly, the expenses there will eat you alive. I have a few, one of my one-liners, and one of them is, you can always tell a bad manager because they try to solve problems by hiring more people. And hiring more people is not the answer. Hiring more people is not the answer. Making the best out of the ones you have, creating a team, a culture of winning and accountability, and we're going to talk about it in some of these podcasts, is where you win. Because the number one expense, if you just think, say you're running on a 10% profit margin and your staff costs are, this is another whole thing. People talk to me about what should the staff cost? It depends on the business model. So let's just say the surgery center. Our surgery center, our staff costs in our surgery center typically run between 30 and 33, 35, 4%. That is, once we start getting up over 35%, the red lights come on. Okay, danger. Because if you're running a 10% business, profit business, and you're running at 30% staff costs, and now you're pushing up to 35, 36, 37, guess what? You have a business that's running into 3% profit. And with big numbers coming in, you get a slow month or two, you can end up having a tough time making payroll. So bigger isn't always better, and staff costs will eat you alive, rule of thumb, if you're not a good leader manager. So I'm going to throw out one leadership book for you to read. I don't know if you're going to get it done before next podcast, but one of the best books I've ever read was by John Maxwell. It's called 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, and we're going to talk about this in a separate podcast. Here's what I learned from Maxwell. Now, Maxwell's background is interesting. He's now a big leadership guy, and I follow a lot of his work. But about 25, 30 years ago, I think he was a minister in a Protestant church on the West Coast. And I won't tell you how he kind of got into that position, the leadership position in the church. But he's since, years after he's since left that, I think his dad was or something. And he now does a lot of teaching with leadership. But one of the things I learned from him was this. You want to see some of the best leaders look into volunteer organizations, because people can walk with their feet. In a business, you can't. So, but if you're not a good leader, an acceptable leader, but a bad, you're going to make more being a good leader, because your staff costs are going to eat you alive. So like I said, if your house is not in order, get some help, get some coaching, get some professional coaching, guidance, business consultant, whatever, to help you learn how to get that in order before you branch out into other different profit centers. Okay. So let's evaluate carefully, and don't forget, what your core is. If someone's, because I have some colleagues of mine who really don't love doing surgery, and, for them, if that's the case, they don't really like doing surgery, then maybe it is worth scaling up on some of these other profit centers. So there may be some, as I mentioned, unintended consequences. You want to look at the competition, and you certainly, as I mentioned, you don't want to offend somebody that does business with you. For example, I know some of our colleagues, do Mohs surgery early. I mean, I don't do any of that work now, the reconstruction, but I never wanted to do it because we had a couple of good Mohs surgeons we had a great relationship with in town. So why would I want to offend them? I would much rather scale up what I'm good at. So there are other reasons you might want to add a profit center, and maybe it's because it, quote, supports your core business. All right. Now, if you look at our Rejuva Center, which we do lasers, injectables, and whatever, and if you can just say that when you look at the revenue going through there, it's not just the revenue, but the number of warm bodies that go through there in a day, yeah, it's profitable. But one of the things it does is it supports our core business. Okay, we are seeing aesthetic patients. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I saw a woman who came in for a facelift, and I have never met her before, but she has been coming to our Rejuva Center for 10 years. That's a relationship. That's something that supports our core business. So that's an important concept to keep in mind. It's different than something that isn't really going to support, so make a list, all the pros and all the cons of your potential profit center, do the market research, ask yourself the honest and tough questions you have to ask, and determine what's the end game, because as I mentioned, it may be a distraction. I can go story after story of things that I've done in the past, including the skincare company, when in retrospect, it wasn't a huge loss. I mean, I learned a lot there. It was a little bit of a loss, but the biggest thing to me was it was a distraction. I should have been spending my time on trying to grow. Again, not like we're suffering, but maybe I would have been better off being booked out, 6 months or whatever, than trying to spend my time, figuring out how to silk screen, and get something in a jar, and what's an attractive silk screen, and where do I get the jars from, and all of a sudden you lose a supplier or something like that. So it could be a distraction. And as I mentioned before, don't forget the scalpel. I mean, nothing as your surgeon, or if you're a procedural dermatologist, may be as rewarding financially or personal than your craft. And these are things you just got to keep in mind. Some other things you need to understand, I think, if you're going to go down the road of being an entrepreneur business person and developing multiple profit centers, the person who runs a small business has the worst job to some degree. I mean, if you go back and read the Ebeth, Sarah, who makes the cookies, and one day, she realized she was cook, bottle washer, taking out the garbage, working 12, 18 hours a day. And by the way, the bank will require a personal guarantee these days on everything you buy. If you buy a piece of equipment, you're signing for it. You buy a building, you're signing for it. You put a $25,000 phone system in, you're signing for it. So, it's important to realize that, and even as much as, payroll goes. As you get bigger, you are personally responsible for payroll. And I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day, and he says, no one should be able to have an opinion until they've had to make payroll or put payroll on their credit card, So, because there are, it gets scary as the numbers get bigger. When it's just you and a couple other people, you're not having to worry about that. We have, between our docs and anesthesia and all the people, the people we have, we're over 75 people now. So we have a couple slow months. I lose a little sleep over that. I'm just being honest. I mean, it's the way it goes. I don't lose a lot of sleep because I've always lived a pretty conservative life. And we're at a point now, I always make sure we have plenty of cash put away to carry us through, so that I can weather those type of storms. So the other thing is important to realize with a profit center growing a business is the only real reason to start a business or grow a business is to have something to sell. So if you don't have good systems, policies, legal and accounting, you never know. I mean, I've already been approached by private equity to sell. You never know when that's going to happen. You never know when something's going to happen to you and somebody else would have to step in. So it is important to set everything up so that you're in a position to sell. One of the other questions you got to ask yourself is, do you really have a business, or do you just have a job, first of all? And do you have a market to sell? Because I think, many times physicians get into this and they don't really think of their exit. And, my line is that's something you should be thinking about in your late 40s and early 50s, believe it or not. I have the building that we're in is a, significant piece of real estate. That's much easier for me to sell. I could put that in the market, and honest to goodness, it'd sell in a couple months because it's fully rented out, leases in place, revenue generating. Without getting into the reasons why medical practices, unless they're set up correctly, and we have spent a great deal of time setting everything correct, it's not saleable. So reasons to move forward in developing your new business or profit center. As I mentioned, the intangible benefits are significant. Maybe it gives you great exposure in the community. If you're putting volumes of people through, or you've got a big building, able to keep your costs down. One of the other intangible benefits of the surgery center, even though it's hard to make money in our surgery center, one of the big intangible benefits is we have control of our costs. If you work out of the quote surgery center by the hospital or the one by the hospital, you don't have that control. You just get notification when the anesthesia just, costs are going up, or the hospital for that matter. So, we have control of our care, our costs, and our quality of our care. I remember once when I was at the hospital, it's an awesome little hospital, Albany Memorial Hospital. I was doing a facelift one afternoon, and I don't know why, we're getting started at 1 o'clock. No, it was later than that. But I remember the anesthesiologist was annoyed that he had to stay late and do my case. And he was within earshot of my patient. And I was only in practice for about a year or so. And I was livid over this. I mean, how would you like to be the patient who just wrote a big check to have a facelift? And you can hear the anesthesiologist talking about, the fact that they don't really want to be there. And it's not fair that they have to stay late this night and that sort of thing. So, those are some intangible, benefits. Reason to move forward with developing profit centers, as I mentioned too. You enjoy leading and managing people. You love maximizing. To me, it's a game, maximizing human potential. I say this all the time. You can solve a lot of problems with leadership. If you have a company of 1,000 people, and you can improve, and because a buddy of mine had one, this right, and 90% of his patients or his staff were engineers. If you can take them and make those 1,000 people 10% more productive, aren't you worth a lot of money? So if you enjoy that sort of thing, mentoring, bringing people along, then that's a good reason to move forward. Are you a prudent risk taker? Are you looking to diversify a little bit? Is it a good investment? What are your other choices? And done well, as I mentioned, is profitable. Jim Collins, in his book, Good to Great, I thought this was really interesting, because I've mentored people and they say, well, hey, Ed, I don't really have a desire to have a big operation like you do. I just want to do why should I go try to figure this stuff all out? Well, Jim Collins had a really good answer. He had a really good answer for that. Somebody asked him, he was at Stanford and again wrote in his book, Good to Great, he tells a story. Somebody got up and said, Dr. Collins, what you're saying with this whole level 5 leadership really makes a lot of sense, but I have no desire to run a big company or run a big corporation, or to have 70 people or 50 people. I just want to run a small business and have maybe a half a dozen people as employed. And his answer I thought was brilliant. And he said basically exactly what I've experienced in life. I have less grief now with 75 employees doing it well than I did when I had 3 or 4 and didn't know what the hell I was doing. So why not go down the road of becoming a better leader and learning how to run your business better? Not only will it be profitable, but you'll have a lot less grief, and it'll be much more rewarding and fulfilling and enjoyable. So, are you willing to go down that road of understanding how to become a better business person? Other reasons to move forward is, one of my favorite lines is the only regrets that people have in life are the things they didn't do. And I can tell you story after story. I'm working on a project right now and I have a business coach that I work with every month. And he basically asked me 2 years ago, he goes, look, how will you feel 10 years from now if you don't go down that road and try this out? And I said, honestly, I'll regret it because I know, at least I think, I can make this very successful. So getting back to that, I see so many people that play it safe for another reason to move forward, right? Play it safe for so long. They just, they want to arrive at death safely, right? They don't want to take risks. But 10, 15, 20 years from now, they look back and they regret the fact that they didn't take the plunge and make a decision to go down that road. So that's another potential reason to move forward on developing profit centers, becoming a better business person, right? Also, you have, let's face it, if you do it well, and we have a lot of things that we've done well, you have something to sell. I mean, if you think about this for a second, your income that you generate off your practice, in my opinion, just ends up being a lifestyle. Where you acquire wealth is by building a business. Okay, you have to figure out how to exit, and you have to figure out how to get your equity out. And we've been through all that, but a lot of people don't. So, but if you do, think about this for a second. The ability to be able to exit, or maybe exit and stay on and still derive an income, is worth a lot, right? How many times I have people who come up to me at the meetings and they're 60 years old. They're like, yeah, I'm trying to, I need to come talk to you because I know you have a lot of this stuff figured out, but I really want to take off more time and but I got this practice and so what are your choices? I think you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your family to at least in my mind, if you're interested in like doing this stuff, to say, well, how can I grow this? How can I exit big? So there are some other reasons to potentially, move forward. As I mentioned, one of the important concepts is make sure everything you do is a standalone profit center. There's one question here. Okay, so when developing the business plan for a potential profit center, how do you perform the market analysis or competition analysis? Have you hired consulting companies? Do you have someone in your staff that is qualified to do this? We have someone in our staff right now. Actually, I'll tell you, I'm going to put a plug in for BSM Consulting. Glenn Morley is a terrific consultant we've worked with that can do a market analysis for you and answer a lot of those questions. For people who run a practice, you can, if you get to certain levels of purchasing with Allergan, they will provide you consulting. And for example, they come in and they look at your per unit time of where you, like, let's just take restaurant. Yeah, and they look at how long you spend on what's the phone call, the consult time, the conversion rate. How long does it take you to treat? And then your frequency of follow-up appointments and such. And they can tell you exactly per unit time what you're generating. That's just one way to quantify. You can do the same thing with a laser. So yeah, there are a lot of terrific consultants out there that can help you with that. So I hope that answers your question. We got about 5 more minutes left. I'm going to just add a couple little things because one real common profit center is technology that people add. And again, as I wrap this up, if you have any other questions, shoot them over to us. I try to answer them at the beginning of the podcast. So one, adding technology. This is where I'm going to go on the record here of saying, in my opinion, 80 to potentially 90% of physician purchases of technology and equipment don't make good financial sense. Okay, I'm going to say it again. This is how strongly I feel about it, and I have the data to back this up. And I've helped look through a lot of folks' practices, and this metric has held true. 80 to 90% of purchases don't make sense on paper. So, one, will the technology pay for itself using cost accounting in 2 years? Number one criteria, okay? Because if it won't pay for itself, it's likely to be obsolete. Now, we've had 3 generations of pulse dye lasers, and that is something that has stood the test of time for us. Number two, is it truly efficacious? If you buy something that's borderline efficacious, it will not pan out long-term, because not only is it costly, but you're burning your credibility with your patients. Fractionated CO2, for example. It came out on the market, and Tim Minton, one of my fellows, I said, Tim, do me a favor. It was out about 2 or 3 years. I said, would you do me a favor and just scour the world literature for the fractionated CO2 for real efficacy. Now, I don't want to see a photo that's marked up by whatever in the before and after. No, I want to see real results. Is it truly efficacious? Will it pay for itself in a couple of years? And doing cost accounting. So I don't have the time. I was going to go through each of some of these profit centers that I do have, but we'll touch this on another phone call or podcast. We have 2 minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions before we wrap this up? And again, our announcement is that April 25th, for those who didn't hear, it's not the next podcast, but the one after that. We're going to talk about life-work balance and avoiding burnout. We're going to do a drawing for those who are on the entire time on the April 25th podcast for 45 minutes of free coaching from me, one-on-one and a phone call. The next podcast is on March 21st, and it's the ABCs of starting a practice, because I know there are a lot of young folks out there. So that's it for now. Here we go. Do I provide private coaching? I don't. We're putting something together. I see Dr. Park on the phone call here. I don't right this moment. Actually, through Equa Marketing, they're going to put something together with some coaching. But there simply aren't enough hours in a day for me. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy doing this. We are putting some things together at some point, and so stay tuned. I really want to thank everyone for joining on this live. And please, what makes it possible is the funding from Equa Marketing. So I thank them very much for doing this. This is something I really enjoy and passionate about. So I love helping and directing. Stay tuned, Eunice. We are gonna put something together at some point here, but not right at this point. We have something, and please do share it with your friends if it's something you found valuable. So I thank you all for listening, and I appreciate it, Lila, for hosting this in Equa Marketing. Have a good month, and I'll see you on the 21st of March.